All right, so the last video for project 2 is to clean up the outliners, right? Because the room you saw was actually pretty easy. You can kind of make it up, but it really gets to show you a couple of new things, like create polygon tool, a little more practice with snap to grid, slice part of multi-cut, booleans, things that you're not always going to have to use. You'll use things like regular multi-cut, extrude, bevel a lot more, but they definitely come in handy sometimes, right? And quite appropriately on architectural stuff, right? So booleans and things like slice, you're going to see a lot more when you're doing buildings and architectural things. All right. So in this case, what we really want to do is we just want to do our little outliner cleanup stuff, right? Remember, we want to be trying to follow this naming convention pretty close. I'm not a super stickler. Like if you just put DAA intro 3D, right, 240, I let that slide as long as it's descriptive of the class and you've got the summer 20 and your name and the project. But remember, you want to be following the naming convention. And it's in the videos, so it's nice. You can always kind of look at it there because it's just getting you guys the habit of following naming conventions. But also, at some point, and you can do this as you're working, you don't have to wait till you're done, right? But you notice how you can kind of ignore it until you're done if you want to sometimes also. But if you're ever getting performance issues, delete history on stuff, right? If groups are behaving weird, or you have groups you don't realize are there, or the transforms are behaving weird, you can kind of do this stuff at any point. You don't have to wait till the end. You definitely want to clean up your outliner at the end though, because this is eventually going to get sent to somebody else. And you clean up your room, right? When somebody, or your house when somebody's coming over, right? Or at least tidy up a little bit. Same kind of principle here. When you pass it on to somebody else, you don't want to give them your dirty laundry, right? You want your setup to be clean. So this is another one of those things where we're just trying to build this habit. It's the kind of thing that doesn't take that long, but you're going to want to know these things, have practice doing these things when you go into later classes, because those later teachers will be mad at you, right? So in this case, I'm just going to channel box layer editor. You don't have to, but it just lets us see what's going on in here, right? So when we go to channel box layer editor, we can see if there's any transformation values in here, and we can see, of course, on our inputs, there's our history, right? The last thing we did on this door frame was that last extrusion, right? But then we did some deleting and we did some polycuts, right? That's multi-cut basically. And of course, the first thing we did was create, right? So remember, we can go down to the create face here, and if I want to give this more subdivisions, boom, but it does that, right? I can go to anything here. I can go to polycut if I wanted to, and I could try out some different stuff, like, hey, let's rotate that at 60 degrees. Once again, you see how it does totally weird, unpredictable stuff. So it's kind of one of those things where it's neat that you have history in theory, but in practice it usually doesn't help that much for most modeling, right? Not always, sometimes it does, but you have the history, you can go to any part in the stack, change values, but it usually is going to do unpredictable things that you don't want it to do to your mesh. So history kind of gives you the ability to procedural model in Maya, where you can go back and change properties, but usually it can be pretty destructive to a model. So you're really not going to need history for modeling that much. Technically, there's even an ability to kind of turn the history off, right? Kind of bring those back up. Right here, you can have it turn it off, but sometimes certain modeling functions don't work, or maybe you wanted to have at least the last couple at the top there. So in theory, you can turn it off, but I found it still sometimes creates groups. Certain modeling tools won't work with it off, and sometimes you do want at least the couple top ones available. So it's kind of the way Maya does it. It's just a little wonky, right? It's one of the few things about Maya I'm like not that big a fan of. A lot of other software doesn't approach it that way, actually. Blender, Modo, 3D Studio Max, they kind of let you kind of opt into doing a procedural modeling function instead of kind of having it always there. So one of the biggest things though is we don't want to pass on all this history. And if you have a lot of history and a lot of objects, that makes Maya run slower. It makes the Maya scene load in a lot slower. So if it takes like 10 minutes to load your scene in, you might need to delete history on stuff. So usually what I do to clean up this stuff is I just, and you also remember we go Windows, Outliner, right? Windows, Outliner. Remember, Outliner is really just your ability to see all your stuff in your scene as lists. Objects, you see there's these groups that have been created. We didn't create those. There's nothing wrong with you guys creating them, but Maya's been creating them on their own. Things like our booleans, things like our extraction that we did, create these, and it's annoying, right? But what I do, my first step is to just select everything, right? I just left-click drag a big box to select everything. And then we go to edit, delete by type history, right? Edit, delete by type history. There's actually a quick key for that. Usually when Maya's got a default quick key, that gets used a lot, right? People delete history a lot because it's not that useful for most modeling, and it can bog things down. There's a quick key for it, so that shows you it's important, right? So edit, delete by type history, Alt-Shift-D. What that does is you'll notice it got rid of the history for all the objects, right? There's no more history for that one. There's no more history for that one. No more history for that one. No more history for that one. You'll also notice it often gets rid of a lot of your groups or all of them. So I like deleting history as my first step because it'll actually get rid of a lot of those groups for you. Occasionally a group is still left over though, like the door group. So it's not magic, right? Sometimes you will have some groups left over, but you'll have a lot less groups left over. So in this case, when you have a group left over, and this is what's cool about Window Outliner, right? Boom, kind of you see all the stuff in here. What you can do is you can click on the group, and then you can go to Edit, just like where Delete History is at, and ungroup it. And there's all your groups are gone. Now you'll notice that this object, the doorknob, everything else is fine because none of the rest of these things we actually moved, right? They didn't actually get moved in the world, but this got moved around in the world at the object level, right? Remember I was kind of doing this stuff to it? So it's got all these transforms, right? If you actually wanted to make this twice as big, you'd have to go in here and go, okay, 64, twice 64 is 128, right? So I'd have to type in 0.128 for all three of those. Not that hard, but it's a little easier if in object mode, right? And you want to do this after everything's ungrouped, right? Because if you have groups selected and you freeze transforms, it'll freeze transforms from those groups, but not necessarily the objects inside of it, right? So usually my freeze and transforms I kind of do after I've gotten rid of all the groups. And remember, that's in Modify menu, freeze transformations, right? And you'll see what it does is the object stays the same, it's in the same position, but now all the translates are 0, all the rotates are 0, and the scales are set to 1. Now if you want to make this twice as big, you just type in 2. It's just easier, right? Particularly if you pass this on to somebody else. So these are the kinds of things you do at periodic points as you're just building stuff to make things a little easier to work with. But definitely, when you pass it on to somebody else, you want your history gone on your objects, right? You want your transforms, usually in most instances, to be frozen. You want your outliner to not have any groups that you didn't create. And also labeling, right? So double click on this object and it's your room. So you just type in room. And that's your doorknob, right? Because it started with the sphere. So double click on that knob. There we go. That's the trim. So double click on that trim. And double clicking on your objects in your outliner, whichever version of it's in Blender or Modo, it actually basically is the same thing. If you double click on them in Blender or Modo, you can rename them. So believe it or not, when you go to other software, you'll be amazed at how much they actually work like other software. There's kind of a lot of conventions that every software uses nowadays. So remember, this is what we want for our outliner, right? No groups that we didn't create, right? Labeled, right? And they can be your own labels, but something descriptive, you know, like doorknob. You don't have to do knob, you just do doorknob, right? And we also want those transforms froze and no history. And that is cleaning up the outliner for the room. Now, of course, we can go File Set Project, but this is actually still set because I've been kind of working on this for these videos today. So I've already set the project. So if I just go to File, Open Scene, it goes right to Scenes. There's our lamp. Hit Open. Don't save that one because I already saved it. Continue. And there's our lamp. And you'll see once again our lamp actually has history, right? And possibly transforms. So we have to clean this up. So we can just left click drag over everything, right? Not necessarily the image plane. You don't have to really worry about the image plane per se. And then of course we can go to Edit, Delete by Type History. And you notice how that got rid of some of the groups, right? And it got rid of all the history is there. And there's this one last group. So we click on that one and we go to Edit, Ungroup. There we go. Now in this case there's a lot of objects in here, so maybe you want to simplify this a little bit. Like maybe your lampshade and your cord, you want to be one object, right? So remember, in Modeling Toolkit you can combine those. And you notice how it created a group? Also, I might want to kind of combine all these top ones up here, right? I don't really necessarily have to have these all super separated. And actually, I really think, switch to, yeah, combine those. I actually really think I want the chord combined with those. So if you've already combined stuff, right, you can separate. And then I can kind of grab these all right here, light bulb included, combine, there we go. And now we have three objects, the lampshade, everything else, and the lamp base. And this will be good for later texturing because we're going to only texture the lamp base and the lampshade. The rest of the stuff we're just going to leave alone. So remember, you can always combine stuff to make them one object. You will notice, though, that if I go back to Channel Box Layer Editor, it's got new history. You'll also notice that there's a lot of new groups because combining and separating does that. So once again, we can go to Edit, Delete by Type History, and that'll get rid of just about all those groups. And then if there's any groups left over, Edit, Ungroup, and there we go. Also, the history with these curves, right? So the curves are visible in there, are also broken. So we can just select those and delete those. Of course, any freeze transforms we want to do. In this case, we're okay because I combined them and it kind of froze those transforms for us anyways, but I'll select everything. And you actually see there is something in there that isn't frozen. And we can go to Modify Freeze Transformations to reset all those. And there we go. And we see that that's all good and rocking and rolling. So there we go. All transforms are frozen. Yay. If you want, you can just select the image plane and delete it. And of course, relabel these. Oh, and that's why I misspoke. Yeah, that's fine. I'll combine these really quick, right? Modeling Toolkit, combine, edit, delete by type history, right? And it's all frozen still, so we're good there. Okay. And then, of course, when we label these, double click on that one, call it lamp base. There we go. It's the lamp shade, double click on that, lamp shade. There we go. And of course, that's the rest, so double click. I'm just going to call it rest of lamp, right? If you want to get a little more specific, you can. And there we go. And that's cleaned up. And this is just kind of that practice at, hey, Windows Outliner, and what Outliner does, right? It's really just a list of all your objects in your scene. We saw it combine and separate, great, putting stuff together. We're seeing ungrouping, right? Because certain modeling functions, grouping, combining, separating, booleans, extract and duplicate from the Edit Mesh menu, right? These will create those groups. And so usually by deleting history, that'll get rid of those groups as well as the history, but it doesn't get rid of all of them. And so sometimes we have to just ungroup. And then of course selecting everything and just freezing our transform so it's zeroed out. And then just double clicking on these to label them, right? And that is how we can clean up our outliners for our stuff. And the nice thing is we're going to keep seeing that on each of our projects and each of our models. So yeah.